It is April 22nd. We are resuming meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, which started on April 13th, 2021. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members can attend virtually and in person. We don't have anyone in person today as of yet. So I will skip the warnings for the people in the room. I think the staff is well aware that's in the room. And I just want to remind everyone, once again, unmute yourself when it's your turn to speak. Make sure your interpretation is on so you can get the full benefit of our interpreters. And of course, thank you. And I think Dr. Duncan was just mentioning that. Thank you to the interpreters and all the staff that has been working so hard for so long to make sure that we can participate in this hybrid format. We really do appreciate all that you do to keep us going. And thanks to all the members. You guys have been very cordial over this difficult time that this committee has been having, somewhat of an impasse, and hopefully we will, come to some kind of conclusion at some point soon. But we are resuming debate on, as Mr. Nader mentioned, we are resuming debate on Ms. Vecchio's motion for specific witnesses to be re-invited on the prorogation study, and we have an amendment to that main motion from Mr. Turnbull. So we are on that amendment, and we do have a speaking list from last time, and on that speaking list is Mr. Sims. We have after that Mr. Luzon, but Mr. Luzon is not with us here today. So I hear he's not feeling very well. I hope he gets better very soon and can be back with us here at committee. But after that, we have Mr. Long. So Mr. Sims, I'll hand the floor back over to you.
Point of order, just really quickly, Ruby. Could you just read out the sub-amendment just so that we can ensure that everybody knows what our actual topic is for today?
Yeah. I'm happy to read it back out. Hold on just a sec. Let me bring it up on my screen.
Madam Chair, I just emailed it to you.
Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to look at the attachment that I had. Perfect. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong attachment. Okay. That the motion of Karen Vecchio concerning the committee's study of the government's reasons for the prorogation of Parliament in August 2020 be amended by 1, by deleting paragraph A, 2, by replacing paragraph B with the following, colon B, renew the invitations issued to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, each to appear separately before the committee at least 90 minutes. And 3, by replacing paragraph C with the following. B, renew the invitations issued to the Honourable Bill Morneau, Craig Kielburger, and Mark Kielburger, each to appear separately before the committee for at least 90 minutes. And 4, by deleting paragraph D to H. So that is what we're looking at. You may need to refer back to the main motion as well to get a better understanding. But essentially, you can tell from there which witnesses Mr. Turnbull would like to see re-invited back to the committee. Okay, Ms. Vecchio, anything else?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right, and we've got Ms. Shanahan also after Mr. Long. Ms. Shanahan, welcome to the committee. Nice to have you here today. And we will resume with Mr. Sims.
Thank you very much. To say that I'm excited as you are is probably the understatement of the day, from my own perspective, of course. I want to start by thanking everybody. I want to start by referring to the sub-amendment from, the amendment from Ryan Turnbull that considers the witnesses in this particular case. So I'll get back to the witnesses in this particular case, or the amendment that attempts to do it, but going back to the issue of prorogation, because as we discuss the prorogation here at Procedure and House Affairs, I think it's very important to put this into the context of what prorogation is all about, what it was meant to be, what it has become, whether it has veered off into gone madly in different directions is another issue, all onto its own, that many scholars, parliamentary scholars around the world, certainly for the Commonwealth, can debate quite extensively as to why we have prorogation. I personally think we do have it for the right reasons, for the grand reset that is to use the vernacular, the grand reset. I suppose the grand reset is really, because I mentioned this the last time, just going back to what I said earlier, the grand reset is obviously an election, but for people like me, when you're involved in parliamentary procedure so much, and I'm sure I'll get a thumbs up from Mr. Nader or Mr. Blakey on that one as we delve into it. I joked last time. I joke, but I'm somewhat serious as well when I talk about how we look at how we've evolved over 1,000 years of democratic, how we do democracy here, certainly for our Commonwealth, for the Commonwealth nations and this Westminster democracy that we have, because going back to the age of the Magna Carta, which was the essential, which the original reason why we did this, as the commoners massed outside of all things, outside every castle that you can think of in southern England. They wanted to bring power to the people in the sense of through their own representation. And I think it was more at the time, if you read the tea leaves, read through the language that was written at the time, certainly if you read over the Magna Carta, you'll see that there was an element of protection from absolute rule from the monarchy. There was also some protection for them as well, and protection for others. And it was the first time we were able to do several concepts 1,000 years ago, which was the separation of what was royalty and what was the power to the people, and the protections for the common person who were subjects of the crown. Plus, on the other side, you had elements such as those who were being accused of doing something absolutely nasty that wasn't bearable by the commoners of England, to be judged by one's peers. It was also spoke of in the Magna Carta and other documents, and we all came from that, of course, as we know. And going back to advance ahead now several years, you're going back now to the Statute of Westminster, where we find ourselves, even though the statute basically of Westminster tells us that we have a right to run our own affairs, we still are attached to the crown. We are still attached to the Westminster traditions. And I say traditions because even though we have a playbook that's about this thick, we still rely on a lot of customs and traditions when we go about our day in Parliament, whether it be the House of Commons or whether it be in the Senate as well. So of all the tools in the toolbox, prorogation is actually quite prescriptive. Think about it. Now, sometimes, as I mentioned, you can take the interpretation and put it madly in different directions. But I think that prorogation has a prescriptive way about how we can accomplish something in Parliament when something comes to an end and we want to restart to do something else. You can argue its existence from here to Sunday, because why would you need that when all you need is an election, or you just bring in different bills once the other bills are done? But I think what prorogation does, specifically sparked by, of course, the speech from the throne, is that it indicates to the average citizen where you want to go. So, and what's wrong with that? To me, that's responsible government. No, it doesn't even have to be a part of Westminster to say to the people, this is where we want to go. This is the target we're trying to reach for. And as we know, the word that's thrown around so much in any democracy whether it be here or any other democracy like the United States of America or South America or throughout the rest of Europe, accountability is key to an informed decision to vote. And the right to vote, of course, is in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It is a basic inherent right of all to express oneself democratically to the people who you want to lead. Some might say, I don't want to be a leader. I don't want to be in a position where I make decisions for the masses, but I sure as hell know who I want to do it. And I know what I'm looking for when that direction is laid out amongst my peers who are seeking my vote. So that being said, prorogation does several things, stops and starts, and it's a little more, but I think on the general sense, the basic principle is the masses, the people will look at us and say, so where is it you want to go exactly? And as they go about doing their daily business, whether they introduce government bills, private members' bills, motions, committee work, studies, reports, all this stuff that's contained within both the House of Commons and the Senate, all that comes from a vision and direction put forward by the government, the party that can, I was going to say party with the most seats, but that's not exactly right. It comes down to a very essential concept, which is the party that commands the confidence of the House and the majority of the seat. That's what you have to do. Because if you think about it, we could be in a situation where a party could within the ranks of one particular caucus, you could be choosing the prime minister, minister of everybody. But it doesn't have to be the party with the most seats. It just has to command the confidence of the House. And you can rely on people outside of your own caucus to give you that confidence. If you recall, several years ago, I forget the date now, it was probably 6-7 years ago when the election that when Cameron was elected in the United Kingdom, and he didn't have a majority, he had a minority. So he had two choices. He can reach out to the other party to make another party to make an agreement to govern for the next 4 years, or just go about their daily machinations of governing and see what happens. So every day you're subjecting yourself, every day the House is sitting, you're subjecting yourself to find the confidence in the House to pass legislation, particularly on confidence measures such as the budget or whatever is deemed confidence at that time. So what they did was they reached out, obviously, to those in receipt of the bronze medal, the third place team. That would be the Liberal Democrats. But what was interesting, which taught a lesson to a lot of people, was you would think that because the Conservatives had the most seats, then they have the prerogative by which they go out and they seek support from another party within the legislature, within the House of Commons, to find themselves with the majority of seats and the majority of votes to keep them going. But interestingly enough, or at least I find this interestingly enough, I don't know if you do, but they also had another negotiation between those who won the silver medal, the second place team, which was the Labour Party. And there were discussions between the Labour group, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats as well. So the first shot went to the Conservatives to reach out, and things were going, we'll see. I guess when the Liberal Democrats looked at it, they went, to a certain degree, I feel somewhat intoxicated with power, being in third place. I may have the bronze medal, but I feel like I'm on top of the podium. So at that point, they were the kingmakers. And in this particular case, things weren't going that well. So they reached out to the Labour side. Now, how does that happen? How does second place team up with third place to be first? Now, if you deal in an absolute world, you think that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it actually does, because second place combined with third place gets most of the seats in the House of Commons. You have the confidence. Now, if they formed government and a year later, the Liberal Democrats said, it's all wonderful and grand, but this place is a little bit much for us. We're going to take the side door and walk out. That means in a confidence vote, if only the Labour Party would be the government, then they would lose confidence. And then the Queen would have to decide whether, okay, look, she has a choice. She can either pick someone else or just go to an election. Okay, so the whole point of that is this. The whole point is that when you look at things like prorogation, you look at setting out a direction by which the government wants to go after the House has chosen who that government is going to be. Way back when, let's go from the UK now back to Canada, because back in Canada, what happened was we had a situation where the Liberals had a conversation with the NDP. I say it like I'm outside of it, but I was in on it. So just for complete transparency. So we had a conversation with the NDP, and we still did not have that confidence because we still didn't have enough seats to take. But we had an agreement with the Bloc at the time, and the Bloc said, "Okay, tell you what, we won't be part of your little game or party, but what we'll do is we'll just stay out here, and we promise we won't take you down." I'm quoting them exactly. So what had happened, Prime Minister Harper at that time sought prorogation. Now we got a conundrum. Now what are we going to do? Because now you have to go to the Governor General and say, well, I think we need a reset. And the Governor General naturally says, now why would you want that? And the Prime Minister says, well, we want to reset. We don't want to do an election, but we just want to reset and probably do something a little different. So we want to present a new vision of where we're going, or at least a new, maybe not so much new as in a revised revision as to where we want to go. Some went so far as to say that we're going to prorogue over this several months because people need to be comfortable. Well, the MPs need to be comfortable with watching the Olympics. You probably think that is absolutely absurd of what I just said, right? It's true. It's true. The Vancouver Olympics were happening. So therefore, we need to prorogue the House. Listen, I'm not going to cast judgment, and I think the tone of my voice probably does. So let me just back away from the tone of my voice by saying this. Look, if this is nefarious at worst, and you know what, somewhat innocent at best, no matter where it lies, the thing is, the argument was really about prorogation. What is it used for? Why? If you're going to use something like this, you better come with your game face, because this is something that is highly prescriptive, as I mentioned earlier, and it's something that is incredibly useful for us as parliamentarians in our parliamentary democracy. Now, there are several other episodes of prorogation. Let's go from that one to the one we have just recently. This is where I may get a little bit more opinionated about how I feel about this particular prorogation, only because of what is happening right now. Preceding my intervention here at the last meeting, I congratulate again my colleague, Ms. Duncan, who laid out the plan, or what had happened over the past little while was pandemic. Now, she's a medical professional, so she's going to do far better than I am at doing this. And she did, well, not only that, but she also illustrated how in her riding and in her sphere of influence, how it was affecting everyday life in this COVID-19 atmosphere. What she talked about, and I would say just as a statement that is probably, is going to sound bland, but I think you know what I mean by saying that, and this is an understatement. What a game changer. What a game changer for governments. What a game changer for everybody. That's those cited in the Constitution, national, subnational, federal, provincial, municipal governments. What a game changer, right? Ask every premier across the country. Yes, I'm in Newfoundland and Labrador. It is true our cases are not dramatic compared to others. I just heard before I got on this call that this is not a good day for Nova Scotia. And for Ontario and Quebec, to my colleagues who are on this Zoom and outside of this Zoom, I wish you all the best for staying safe. So let me get back to prorogation. What I just illustrated was a change in vision by a particular government, okay? Yes, when a government finds itself in a position where it's close to being exhausted for its former mandate that they brought to the people, and now they find that they want to do something that is essential for the country, but it may not have been laid out before. What they do is they do that. But again, this is the prerogative of a government that finds itself in a position where it wants to do something different, and they don't feel completely comfortable by just doing this, by sheer dint of their own personality, by saying, hey, look, we can do this, we're the government. Okay. What we have here is a different scenario. This is where the ground has changed beneath our feet in a major way. This is the stuff that we talk about when we change what we do because of a major war. And in a sense, this is a war against what is the invisible enemy, which is this virus. We're battling on all fronts. We are nurses, we are doctors, we are truck drivers, we are teachers. Just yesterday, I spoke to a gentleman who works as a technician who hooks up internet service. Now, you might think, well, okay, well, how is he a frontline worker? Well, he's now bringing a school to kids. Remember, the internet for these small communities was a great tool for schooling. Now it is the school, given what we're going through. It is the school now. So that person is vital in a way that we could never have imagined before any of this happened. Has the ground changed beneath our feet? It sure has. And if nothing else, this will be probably the most important thing I want to say today is, if you cannot bring in what parliamentary procedure describes as a reset in prorogation, if you can't do it now, when? When do you do it? It is a fundamental question. I mean, some people might say it's not necessary. I have no doubt about it. Scholars, people smarter than me might say that. But, I go back to the experience that I've had. I've been here now almost 18 years. I've probably been here as long as some of the gargoyles that exist above West Block, for God's sakes. But in saying that, I've seen a lot of this come and go. And whether you think prorogation is used for nefarious reasons, whether it's used for the right reasons, I now come to realize that prorogation has to be used when it's absolutely necessary. And this is a third dimension to this that I never thought of before until now. There have been several headlines back to the few times that Prime Minister Harper did it, back when Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien, and a lot of it got lost. Prorogation got lost into an argument of who gets the advantage here. It's like a game of chess. Whose side gets the advantage of doing this? I think that this prorogation is bereft of anything that is strategy, which is being talked about here. I'll be honest with you. And I realize that being on the government side, sure, that's the side you would expect me to take. But there are times, hey, listen, there was a time when prorogation happened during conservative years that I agreed with too. And disagree with many of my own colleagues in my own party as a result of that. We're not doing this so that we can be comforted in watching the full extent of the Vancouver Olympics. We're doing this because we're at war. And there are way too many lives have been lost in the last little while for us to get into this. Now, I respect the fact that you want to get to an issue that is of importance. And I'll go back to Ms. Vecchio's motion and the sub-amendment to follow about the situation with the charity, with the situation of the individuals involved that you want to bring here, such as the Deputy Prime Minister, and as the sub-amendment points out, the Kielburger brothers. Look, I have as many questions as anybody else on this call. That I do. And I'm respectful of that, and I'm respectful of your initiative to get to the bottom of this. let's recall now, from 2006 to 2015, I was in opposition. I know how this works. I'm not in the middle of a filibuster. I'm in a prolonged conversation of what's going on, right? So, you know, we've all had our share of doing the things that we do for the good of the country. Some people might think it is not. We accuse each other of not. But this is, you know, some people look at me and say, why would you be involved in a prolonged conversation, which we would call a filibuster, so on and so forth? But it is a part of democracy. Every modern democracy has it. And when we look at this, you're probably thinking, why would you be involved in these sorts of things when outside of this realm of Zoom, there are some nasty stuff going on? Well, yeah, that's right. There is. But I can tell you that we all come to this particular, I was going to say come to this committee meeting, but this committee Zoom meeting from a virtual perspective, only to say that we truly believe in what we're doing, all of us. And I don't doubt anybody. And I'm not going to undermine anyone's argument as to why they want to bring certain witnesses in that we've already heard, or there's delays to all this because of the shenanigans that take place in the House of Commons. Many of these shenanigans that existed in the real world now exist in the virtual world. Well, that's fine, because that's who we are as parliamentarians. This stuff isn't going to end, but only to argue your point. Sometimes we say that we shouldn't. What bothers me a lot these days is that we try to, instead of fighting an argument with a counter argument that bears, in my mind, complete logic, like why this prorogation should be now, in the fact that I just want to shut people down. But let's be honest, like, we have a right to talk our way through this, and we should. When I first got into politics, a person with a great deal of experience told me, now that you're in politics and now that you're starting in politics, my advice to you is this. It's a simple advice based on math. I said, what's the math? And I said, get more seats, you get to be government. He said, no. No, it's not that. He said, this is very simple math. This is called 2-to-1 ratio. I said, what's 2-to-1 ratio? He said, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Play to the ratio that you got. Try to listen more than you speak. And as time goes on, you might find yourself in a position where you've done far more good than not. Paraphrase Shakespeare, you could just keep on going and it could signify nothing. Or it could signify something that you're proud of at the end of the day. Now, would I be proud of all the shit? I was in opposition, as I mentioned earlier. Am I proud of all the stuff that I tried to pull in? That? No. But, I'm proud of the fact that I did my best. And at the end of the day, I'm proud of the fact that I think I represented my constituents in the best way possible, and for not just my own constituents, but every Canadian that wants to live in a better place. And let me go back to the prorogation issue again, because I think that's, to me, the essence of which prorogation is about. I think we're talking about two different things on two different planes when it comes to getting answers to questions of something that happened, that you want these questions to be answered, and parliamentary on one side, and then on the other side you have parliamentary procedure and why we use the tools that we have. So that being said, prorogation started off long before we were around, and long before I came around. So, and that's quite some time. But as far as prorogation is concerned in this country, it has a base to it. I'm just going to read some of the very base of what prorogation is all about. I got here in 2004. I think it was 2010 when I learned how to actually spell prorogation. Before I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't even know how to spell it, for goodness sake. So it's a prerogative act of the Crown, taken on the advice of the Prime Minister, results in the termination of a session, right? And is possible to prorogue a session of Parliament by proclamation when the House is sitting or during an adjournment. Both the House of Commons and the Senate then stand prorogued until the opening of the next session. Now, there's the timing. Sometimes you could go months to the full extent until you get the expiration of something like the Vancouver Olympics. Or you could do it the next day, because that has happened too. The time period in the most recent prorogation, I think, was reasonable enough, a few weeks, to allow the government to basically to reorganize its priorities to the point where you put itself forward as where we want to go. Remember, now we're in the middle of a pandemic in this, right? I'm going to be quite honest with you. If the Conservatives were in government and prorogued at the time that we did, and prorogued and then reassembled with a speech from the throne, I'd be at a loss to say it was nefarious by any stretch of the imagination. It's a pandemic. I don't know how I can say this more often, in the fact that we're at war, and governance, look what we've done over the past little while. CERB, wage subsidies, all this stuff. And let's take CERB as an example, right? Which was needed by so many of my constituents. This was not only more money, this was a new concept. We originally started with EI and realized the system wasn't working. And to say that we had to change gears and go from EI to CERB, that's an understatement. If you were to say to me before the last election, we need a whole new system by which we provide benefits to people who are in trouble, completely outside of EI and delivered through the Canada Revenue Agency, yeah, good luck. 3 studies and 8 years later, maybe a modicum of it. And we had to do it. I'm just outlining the challenges by which we faced at that time. And even as an individual MP sitting in your office, taking calls from people, do I qualify? Do I not? What do I do? This is, at a time when these programs were coming out very quickly. I mean, we had to say the government had to be nimble is also an understatement. Regarding wage subsidies is probably even a better example, because you had so many companies that were slipping through the cracks that couldn't qualify. You had to take the back end, you had to take it and you maneuver it in such a way that these people now qualify. Not because, we felt that it wasn't working for us, but because it had to work for them. And the intent was to get most people covered. And to do that, to be nimble is an understatement. I'm just saying that because it paints the picture by which prorogation finds itself in the appropriate manner that we had to invoke. The effects of prorogation, as it pertains to how we read it from our policy or from Commons and procedure. Prorogation of a session brings to an end all proceedings before Parliament, with certain exceptions. Unfinished business dies on the order paper and must be started anew in a subsequent session. Again, you look at the situation that we were in. Some of the stuff in the order paper, yes, very important, so on and so forth, but then you have to come back to it. But keep in mind, a lot of this could be brought back from the former session that any government or anybody calling for prorogation can take advantage of as well. Bills which not have received royal assent before prorogation are entirely terminated, and in order to be proceeded with in the new session, must be reintroduced as if they had never existed. On occasion, however, bills are reinstated at the start of a new session at the same stage that they had reached at the end of the previous session. I heard someone describe prorogation as, pardon my language, it's not my language, but pardon me for quoting it, a guillotine, or slice it right down the middle and that's it, it's done. Not necessarily. It's more like the big hand that comes in and say, whoa, okay, you stop right there. And some of it can be brought back. On occasion, bills are reinstated at the start of new session at the same stage they had reached at the end of the previous session. This is accomplished either with the unanimous consent of the House or through the adoption of a motion to that effect. After notice and debate, the House has also adopted provisional amendments to the standing orders to carry over legislation to the next session following a prorogation. Just looking around, see if I lost anybody. Nope, you're still there. But then again, we're parliamentarians, so There you go. I see Ken McDonald waving from way back in his office somewhere in the deep dark corners in that beautiful writing of Avalon. Good to see you, Mr. McDonald. Since 2003, prorogation has had almost no practical effect on private members' bills, so the sanctity of a private member's bill remains despite the prorogation. As a result of this significant exception to the termination of business principle, the list for the consideration of private members' business established at the beginning of Parliament all bills that originate in the House of Commons and all motions in the order of precedence, as well as those outside of it, continue from session to session. So there's a sanctity of that. One person I give credit to for doing a lot of this stuff was Paul Martin, who brought in a lot of changes into our procedures. Good ones too. For instance, private members bill. Do you know when we vote on a private members bill, we start in the back row? Why do we do that, you ask? I'm glad you asked, Wayne Long. I'm glad you asked. Because what the point is that you don't be influenced by the front bench of your party. So the back row gets the row first. Sometimes, and this is just an aside, sometimes you'll see we used to say that the worst place to be was to be in opposition or in the back benches, sitting up in the way corner, and you had to vote first.
We're closer to the buffet, though.
Well, that may be true.
Yes,
and congratulations on that, Mr. Long. I'm sure that serves you well.
I can smell the food. I can smell the food.
Yes, I can, all the way from my little corner here in Grand Falls, Windsor, Newfoundland. You know, it's funny you mention that, because if you look at all that has been done and the changes that we've made, I think we could make more when it comes to the rules of the House of Commons. I personally do. Now, I may go too far with it, but I think we've made some changes. And that's another thing that's going to happen. That's another reason why we say that the ground is shifted beneath our feet. Last time I voted in the House of Commons, this is probably made too much information. I was running on a treadmill in Sandy Point, Newfoundland, Labrador. And I used this to vote. Yep. I voted. It's my right to vote. It's my responsibility to vote on behalf of my constituents. It was transparent. It was posted up there. And I realized that, my goodness, life has changed for us dramatically. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we used to vote like it was the 19th century. Stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. That's fine if you like that, but it creates for some long, long, long times in the House of Commons, and you take people who are young parents. It's not easy when you have to be seconded into one little place and you have to stay there for hours doing the voting when you can now do this. So now that we've caught up with technology, that's great. But if someone said I could vote in the House of Commons on my phone after the last election, not even close to being possible. I mean, in the House of Commons, we don't even have a clock to tell you how long you have left to speak. I can't. We're probably the only place that does that. And anyway, perhaps I'll even help out the opposition by saying I'm gone off topic, and I'll just bring myself back. Sorry, Ms. Vecchio, I apologize. I know it's your motion, so let me just get back to where I was. You're right. Okay, so let's go back to prorogation again, because I think that's the fundamental part about this. Members are released from the parliamentary duties until the new session after prorogation. So prorogation provides the Crown, taken on advice of the Prime Minister, as I mentioned earlier. The committees resume activities after that is done. They are reconvened. We have to go through the process of committee work again, which makes sense, because if you're taking the government in a different direction here now, or your policy is taking a different direction, then you have to dissolve the committees to put them back, because the whole point of committee is to analyze legislation. So that needs to be reconfigured. That I get. I'm glad private members' bills are okay, because if you think about it, a private members' bill is something that you hold deep within your heart as true a piece of legislation that should be passed. Truly, it should be a law for this country, or a motion to say that we should do good by this country. I don't think that changes much. You know, if you say want to extend sick benefits, say from 15 to 26 weeks, I had a private members bill that did that many years ago. Fortunately, it's done now. But at the time, that doesn't change. I still want people, if 15 weeks doesn't cut it, and we need more in the EI system to allow for people who are off work because they are sick and no fault of their own. So you're probably thinking now, and I'm just presupposing here, if this is prorogation in Canada, how does prorogation work from the people who invented it, the UK? Ken McDonald, I'm glad you asked, because I know you're asking. I could see your face in anticipation. Prorogation, United Kingdom. The constitutional law usually used to mark the end of a parliamentary session, much like our own. Part of the royal prerogative, it is the name given to the period between the end of the session of the UK Parliament and state opening of Parliament that begins in the next session. So that's basically the same as ours, right? Okay, so nothing changes there. That's all part and parcel of where we got it from, essentially. But very different in the origins of prorogation. Hold on now, I have to get my eyes. God, aging is a wonderful thing. The Queen formally prorogues Parliament on the advice of the Privy Council. The Privy Council, of course, being the cabinet. Prorogation usually takes the form of an announcement on behalf of the Queen, and she did it recently. She prorogued the House in her 90s. God love her. As with the state opening, it made both houses, of course, they have the House of Lords, House of Commons, MPs attend the Lord Chamber to listen to the speech. All that's much the same. What happens to bills still in progress at prorogation? Prorogation brings to an end nearly all parliamentary business. I suspect, I don't know, perhaps Mr. Nader could tell me the difference here. He's more of a scholar about this stuff than I am, but I think they go further when it comes to prorogation and the determination of government business of the day, like the bills and so on and so forth. At least that's my impression. So they, of course, it's a serious thing taken way back when. Now, recently in the UK, theirs went to the Supreme Court over the prorogation that was put on by Mr. Johnson at the time, and so it became very contentious, to say the least, because they were all bordering on the idea of minority parliaments, and it twisted themselves into pretzels over how they're going to do this, and so on and so forth. And that's when the Supreme Court got involved. A session of Parliament runs from the state opening of Parliament in the past. This has usually been November through the following November. So they used to take longer periods of time to do this, up until recent memory. So this is how they did things in the UK. UK is also had, when at the origins of what was prorogation, early prorogation ceremonies had 4 key elements. First, the speaker made a speech mainly concerned with a subsidy bill. A bill, now this is how they describe a subsidy bill. This is for sheer entertainment purposes. A subsidy bill. It's really kind of funny. They call it a bill for the better support of His Majesty's household. I found that rather. So early, then the Lord Chancellor or the Lord Keeper, another official of the royal household. They had a title who was involved, and the person was the Lord Keeper. I'm not sure if it exists, but if you ask your average person, average British person, what is a Lord Keeper, you'll probably see the best goaltender in soccer in all of the UK. Otherwise, the Lord Keeper actually has a title and is part of the Majesty's household that deals with this sorts of thing. The Lord Chancellor either prorogued or dissolved Parliament according to the sovereign's instructions. The sovereign was customarily present on these occasions, and from the 17th century onward, usually made the speech before prorogation or dissolution. Well, how about that? So there were two elements of it, which we used to do as well, if memory serves, where you have a speech at the ending and then you have a speech at the beginning. Now, of course, the speech at the ending was probably more towards justification. I would assume now with modern communications that it's quite evident why, or at least you have to explain why you're doing this prorogation. What's more important, though, is when the House begins and you have the speech from the throne. That's not only the reason why you prorogued, but it's also the very reason why you lay out to the country. That's the most important part, is what I'm trying to say, because then you have to lay out for the country exactly what it is you're trying to do and where you want to go. And where you want to go, really reverse engineers an answer as to where you've been and why you've done what you've done. I personally, I've never witnessed a speech at prorogation within the context of, say, a speech from the throne, but I wouldn't feel it's really necessary. And I say that for any party that's in government. I think that's probably a little bit much. But in saying that, it is quite something. Well, at this stage, you're probably wondering one of two things. A, when will he be quiet? B, what do they do in Australia? Let's go down under, shall we? What do they do? Because they, of course, have the same system as we do. So, that being said, let's get to it.
If I could, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering,
excuse me, is this protocol thing, or how's that work?
Well, it is indeed. So
Okay.
I'm just wondering, I know we've had other members that aren't as open to the Sims protocol, but given
That is true.
given that you are, after all, the notorious Mr. Sims, I thought you might be more willing to entertain an intervention than others. So I just thought I'd put the question.
Is that okay, Mr. Sims?
Mr. Blakey, not only would I entertain it, I would be honored to do so. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. One of the things that I've been trying to sort out, not just throughout your intervention, but through that of others, is, so I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for other members of the committee here, but I think it's pretty clear that the Prime Minister was acting within his constitutional right to prorogue Parliament. I don't think that's where the dispute is. There's a question as to motive, obviously, and that's been investigated at other committees, including here. And I'm concerned about some of the goings on of the We Charity scandal, and concerned about the way that prorogation interfered with parliamentary proceedings on the matter. And so I think that's serious, and that's why I've been supportive of the motion that the amendment we're currently discussing seeks to modify. But beyond that, I think there are some other questions, like, for instance, the timing of the prorogation. So both when it began, but also the length of time. We know that opposition parties, I'll speak again, for the NDP was calling for Parliament to return earlier in September, something that was made impossible by the prorogation, because we were concerned about the pending expiration of CERB and wanted to make sure that we got the legislation right, and that there was an opportunity for parliamentary discourse on that. So a shorter prorogation, closer to the speech from the throne, would have created some space for Parliament to meet, including the final meeting for a summer meeting of Parliament that was scheduled and would have taken place shortly after the day that the Prime Minister decided to prorogue. So there's questions about the timing and the effect that had on the discussion about what happened at the end of CERB as we knew it then. And what we've constantly heard in all of that is that, at the end of the day, it's the Prime Minister who makes that decision, because he's the one with the right to make that decision, and that's just the way it is. So that's why I think it would really make sense in the context of this study, an historic study, in the sense that there hasn't been a like study of prorogation before. There hasn't been a like study of prorogation before because it's never been we've never required the government to give any reasons under the standing orders. That was something that the Prime Minister himself committed to in 2015 as his proposal for how to correct the abuses of prorogation that occurred under the Harper government. And so now, we have a kind of dual reason, as far as I'm concerned, for hearing from the Prime Minister beyond pressing for more answers on the We Charity scandal, which is in itself, in my view, a very legitimate reason to have him here. But it's also a question around his decision on the timing and the length of prorogation. And it's about setting a good precedent for his own remedy to the abuses of prorogation under the Harper government, which was to have the government submit a response, to have it go to PROC, presumably for study. And because we keep hearing that all roads lead back to the Prime Minister on the prorogation, it's important for us to hear on the substance of this particular prorogation, but also in general, to set the precedent that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee would, as a matter of routine, hear from Prime Ministers when prorogation happens. And I find it hard to believe that anybody who felt that Harper had abused prorogation, as I do, and I think from your comments earlier, you also feel, Mr. Sims, that had the Procedure and House Affairs Committee studied that it would have been important to have the Prime Minister there, and in fact that Prime Minister ought to have appeared before PROC in order to try and provide some justification for what he did. And so we've got the issue of the precedent on how this mechanism that the Prime Minister himself has devised in order to prevent political abuse of prorogation should happen. And then we have some matters beyond the We Charity scandal of the timing and duration of prorogation. And we've heard that the person who can really answer this is the Prime Minister. So, I've said before this committee very clearly that if the Prime Minister would publicly commit to coming to PROC for an hour, that we could dispense with this motion, because I'd be satisfied at least that we then set a good precedent, even if I don't like the answers that the Prime Minister is going to provide, that we'd at least get the precedent part right. And we would have an opportunity to further explore these questions around the timing and length of prorogation. Now it seems to me, obliquely, I feel, Liberals have said that I'm engaged in some sort of extreme partisanship on the matter. I don't think that comes off as a really extremely partisan thing. I think there's some appropriate concern for establishing a new parliamentary tradition and getting it right from go. I think there are legitimate questions around the timing and length of prorogation that are fair to ask. And what we've heard is that we've yet to ask it of the decision maker himself. And so wouldn't it be appropriate to conclude this study by hearing from the decision maker and then getting on with filing the report and moving on to other business? Thanks for the opportunity to intervene. I really do appreciate it.
Well, sorry. Can I, Madam Chair?
Yes, of course. Of course, the floor is back to you.
Thank you. No, listen, thank you for taking the time. I appreciated it. And there's quite a bit to unpack, but I will say this: one thing I will unpack in the beginning is where we find common ground. First of all, let me just say this as probably a large disclaimer to put out there. I was not in on the conversations to prorogue, how to communicate to prorogue, why you want to do that. So I'll speak from my own logic, from my own little corner of the world here in central Newfoundland, as I feel I should. First of all, I will give kudos to the Prime Minister for showing up prior to this in front of committee. And my apologies in advance to my Conservative friends. And listen, I had great respect for Prime Minister Harper, but as I've said before, and I'll say again, Prime Minister Harper going to a committee, he wouldn't go near a committee if he had to walk through it to get home. But we did have a current Prime Minister who did show up to that committee, and I gave him kudos for doing that. We found a lot from that, I think. Let me go back to the proroguing issue. And maybe this goes to the point of, and maybe I can, if there's one thing I could probably reverse course on in what I'm thinking, given the conversation we're just having here, is the old tradition of formally speaking on the proroguing itself, and then bookending it with the beginning of the next session where you do your speech. So basically, you have a clear communication as to why you're proroguing. Should the rules change around proroguing? I don't disagree with you at all, quite frankly. I think it is a tool to be used, but it's also a tool to be communicated, by which this is a serious thing. And if you do it, you have to justify it. So the element of bringing it forward for PROC, for Procedure and House Affairs, I should not talk in common speak, but Procedure and House Affairs Committee to be involved in that decision. That something that's not a bad idea. And again, I speak on behalf of my own self. I think that is something we should consider, because if you do this, the justification is there and the transparency should be there for someone who wants to do something as this. Let me also talk about, Mr. Blakey, the timing of this. And again, this is from my own perspective. Let's pretend I'm Prime Minister. Don't be worried, anybody. That's likely not to happen. But in case I was, when you mention some of the elements, I forget some of the timing you illustrated, and I don't condemn the logic which you come from on this one when it talks about the fall and when it started, when it should go ahead. A lot of that is well founded. It's, for me, there will be a decision of this and that, this day, that day. But the one thing is the proroguing of the House immediately prior to around the time we did, say just before the House was scheduled to begin, I think was a good time to do that. And I say that for this reason. The functions of pandemic policy, the CERB, the wage subsidy, the rental alleviation, all the other elements that were involved in these new programs are created because of COVID-19. I think they had to play out further from the spring and into the summer. In other words, we as policymakers had to get a better grounding in what we were dealing with and how what was working and what was not before we decide to prorogue and have a speech from the throne that illustrates how we're going to go ahead in the future. Now, that is, to me, that's why you do in the fall instead of the spring. It's hard to gauge where the forest lies when you're still going between trees. And that's basically what we were doing with some of these, especially the things like the CERB and others, and how the CERB, which was created outside of EI at that point, I think we were going through a lot of that stuff before we found solid ground enough to say that we need to prorogue the House and do the reset. Now is that time. Anything later than the fall probably would have stretched out too far. I think we found it only because the session would have started the same way it ended before, which was a lot to do about what do we do about the pandemic. So I take your point seriously. I think the timing of the proroguing was logically, I won't say spot on, as we say in Newfoundland, but it was within that window. I think that served Canadians well. The other point when you talked about the justification aspect of proroguing the House and doing this great reset. Yeah. If you have a private member's bill, I'd love to see it. And I think that's something that we can consider. But again, I'm just speaking on behalf of myself because I really love talking about procedure in our House of Commons. I think that not only is it something that we use today to make the country better, it's something that we give our children to govern themselves. And I think conversations like this need to happen, especially at this committee, which is the overarching and loving way to say I miss you guys, because in the last session I was on this committee. But anyway, Mr. Blakey, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Getting back to all things down under, I was going to talk about Australia. I need a show of hands. Who wants to hear about Australia? I know you are. Okay, no, just one at a time. All right. So the thing about it is that in Australia, it's much the same. They talk about in the past were much the same arguments, like maybe they've used it in a nefarious way and in a way that you're not supposed to be used. You've basically taken a fundamental concept of resetting policy and the being transparent to the people to allow them to see where you're going, and they've done that. And then, but the other ones say, no, you're just being strategic for your own selfish purposes. Yeah, so a new parliament begins with the opening by the Governor General on the first day the two houses meet after a general election. Of course, as you know, that we already know. They do like us. A new session opened by the Governor General. The prorogue parliament means to bring an end to a session of parliament without dissolving the House of Representatives or both houses. Now, they have House of Representatives. They have a Senate as well. Their upper chamber is elected, by the way. I don't know if anybody knew that, which is very interesting. They do it on proportional representation basis, but it's also very interesting. So you're actually seeing people involved in this protest whose upper chamber is also elected. Now, how that affects the idea of prorogation, I don't know. I do know that when you have a conflict between two houses, they have a dispute mechanism that is very interesting. Something that we may want to think about in the future now that we have a largely independent Senate. It's not elected, but it's a largely independent Senate, which I think, by the way, is one of the great things that the Prime Minister did in the past 5 years or so. Without prorogation has the effect of terminating all business pending before the Houses of Parliament. It does not meet again until the date specified in the proroguing proclamation. Now, from that, I gather they do a lot more than we do. Like it may be in essence the true guillotine that we spoke about earlier, where they just cut things off and it's a complete and utter reset without actually calling for an election. So maybe some of the experts can dispute what I just said, But they also say, how long is the Parliament prorogued for? Well, there is little direction on how long Parliament should be prorogued for. However, Houses of Representatives practice states that the recess involved need only be very short. For example, over a weekend. Well, how about that? That's for being prescriptive. That's right. That's quite a weekend, isn't it? If you end on Friday and start up again on Monday, talk about a ruined weekend for a lot of people. Like that just ruins your weekend altogether. So they do it much like we do. The Senate is not able to revive bills, their upper chamber, originated in the House without a request from the House. So maybe that's I don't recall. That's fairly recent for us. I say fairly recent, within the last 30, 40 years, about bringing bringing bills back after a prorogation. So it seems like it's something in Australia that happened for quite some time, which I think is right. I agree with that, by the way. I think that's essential. And I gave the example of the private members' bills earlier, where you can, they're not touched. There's not even a question of bringing them back. They're there. And that, to me, is quite respectful for every individual member of Parliament. There is no limitation on the Senate introducing new bills and debating them, of course, which is what we do. And the Senate may also add any other business it wishes to address, such as motions, orders, and committee business, that, of course, following the prorogation. So they do it the same. Now, that being said, also what happens to committees? Practice differs between the committees of the House of Representatives than the committees of the Senate and the joint committees. Well, there's something that is different. House of Representatives, which is their version of House of Commons, committees generally continue to exist following a prorogation, but do not meet during that time. So their committees, for the most part, stay intact. Committees of the House and joint committees appointed by, sorry, I'm reading really fast. My apologies to the interpreters. I tend to do that from time. And that's a lesson for all of us. When you're reading from something, you should probably make a mental note to slow down. This is just one way of note to self for me. Committees of the House and joint committees appointed by standing order or by resolution for the life of the Parliament continue in existence, but may not meet and transact business following prorogation. So they may not meet, but they still exist. It's still there. So that's a key difference. Senate committees may continue to operate and meet following prorogation. This is due to the Senate's status as a continuing House. Very good. And due to resolution standing orders that allow for their continuation. That's that. Okay, so we, now, that's Australia, much like our own, to summarize, because now they keep more things intact, it seems, except for some of the bills. I think they take a lot of the bills out, but it's certainly something in the spirit of things. In the spirit of it, it's much like the UK, which is much like ours. So what all this to say, that is, prorogation is a pillar of our democracy that not only has survived through time, but it survives through place. It's one of those fundamental things of the UK establishment, the UK parliamentary system, that has been transferred to other jurisdictions and remain relatively same. Some of the traditions that they carry that was brought to us change, of course. In the UK, they have standing committees for legislation, but they also have standing committees. Well, they call them select committees, which are on a more permanent basis. These are committees that do reports. But whenever a major bill is passed, then they set up a new committee around that one. Now, our standing committees do both. We function parallel. We do reports. We do certain issue, the issue of the day, as it were. We have hearings on that, but we also, of course, which are prime importance, is to study legislation. Now, let's go to New Zealand. I'm kidding. I won't get into what happens in New Zealand, and that's no offense to anybody from New Zealand. Their system is very similar to ours. They have a different voting system where they do something along the lines of mixed member proportional system. But they, I'm glad you brought up New Zealand for this reason alone. They actually have, I don't know if they still do, but they have designated seats for the Maori, for Indigenous, which is a very interesting concept. The last time that's been floated here was during the Charlottetown Accord, way back when the idea was introducing the concept of Indigenous representatives, I think for the Senate. at the time. So very interesting. But I know New Zealand has gone further with it, with their Indigenous representatives. That's all I have to say about them right now. I see that my time is winding down. First of all, I want to thank everybody for their patience. Ms. Vecchio is just over brimming with glee that I'm going to be quiet for a while. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. She's not saying that at all. That's just me just having fun. So I want to thank you for putting up with me because it allows, and I want to thank Mr. Blakey as well for bringing this up. He brought up some very good points, and thank you for the intervention. So Chair, back to you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Always very educational. Every time you speak, I feel like we all learn a little bit of something about history and democracy. And so thank you for that, your comments. Mr. Long, you are next.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And from St. John, good afternoon to everybody on PROC. Scott Sims is clearly a very hard act to follow. I literally, yeah, you can't see this here, but that's a bowl of popcorn. I finished the bag listening to him. That was as good as anything I'd seen. And for something like that to hold my interest, like with no pictures or infographics or anything like that, that's amazing. You know, I have a little bit of I don't hide a little bit of ADHD. Sometimes I need, you know, something to capture my attention for me to really focus. Let me tell you, Scott Sims captured my attention with that wonderful, wonderful presentation. Scott, you have my respect, my friend. First time I met Scott, I remember it was shortly after being elected in 2015, and there was a meeting of cross-party meeting, actually, of MPs who had NAS airports in their ridings. And there was an issue with some funding for NAS airports. So we all went to Scott's office for a meeting. And I was told to, and I may be a little off in the Scott, but I was told to go over to East Block. Nodding his head. And I didn't know if I was going to the Soviet Union or where I was going, like East Block, West Block, Center Block. The whole thing was new to me. But, you know, I got to know Scott, obviously, and try to emulate as best I can his style of politics. Straight shooter, speaks from the heart. Canada is very, very well served with more MPs like Scott and like other MPs on this committee who, really want what's best for Canadians and wants what's best for all of us to move on. And today I've got a lot to say. I have a lot of thoughts. To mirror Scott, there's Scott Sims, 2004 MP. As soon as he did 2004, like I was counting on my fingers and my toes. It's like, oh my, 21. That's 21 years. 21 years. Scott, is that correct? 21? I think we'll get a head nod there. 21 years as a member of Parliament, give or take. Amazing. I mean, I've been 5.5 years, feels like 50. So I don't know how 21 years feels. I'm sure I'll never quite
it's actually
make
18.
it that far.
18.
What's that?
18.
Oh, 8. Oh, okay. Oh, right. I'm thinking, I'm a little off my math there. I must be thinking of a few other things. But look, Scott comes at this from a certain perspective of an MP that has been around, seen it all, seen the good, seen the bad, and really in a nonpartisan way, I will say, because Scott certainly calls it like he sees it. My perspective is different. I came to the House, Parliament, came to be an MP, more recently, obviously, 2015. So, I joked last time I talked in PROC, I consider myself a seasoned veteran, but not really. I don't kid myself. I have so much to learn. I do the best I can. I want to be a good representative for my riding. I want to convey the hopes, dreams, the concerns of my constituents in Ottawa. I want to represent this riding the very best I can. But, and I certainly would never say Scott hasn't been out in the real world, because he certainly is. But, I come at it much more recently and from a different viewpoint where, I look at this, Madam Chair, as somebody who always is saying, what do Canadians really think about what we're doing? What do Canadians really think about the motion? And to be perfectly honest, MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion. And I know there's give and there's take and there's compromise and there's back and forth. And, obviously, the Conservative Party has, a certain outcome they want to see from this. Fair, that's fair. And we have a certain outcome we want to see from this. But typically, when you have an amendment or a motion, then an amendment, there needs to be some compromise. There needs to be a way to meet in the middle. And, I know my Conservative friends won't agree with this, but there's also a time when I think all parties need to step back and say, okay, we've made our point. We could say, look, we've made our point, we've defended. But there also has to be, and this is where I'm coming from, Madam Chair, at times, is I think somebody who, was a business person, lived in, I don't want to say the real world, because certainly this is the real world too, but, had to do things like balance budgets and meet payroll and deal with agents and sign players and trade players and all those things. There has to be a point where, as parliamentarians, we need to realize that the country, our constituents, want us to move on. They want to move past this. Sure. As MP Sims has said, I think it's significant that the Prime Minister has testified. I think it's extremely significant, unprecedented, and wanting him to come back. And I just very quickly, and MP Vecchio will hopefully indulge here. The original motion, and don't worry, Karen, I won't read it out, I promise. But the original motion cast such a wide net, that it was blatantly obvious to me that the Conservative Party just didn't get the answers that they wanted to get. Not that there wasn't answers, not that there wasn't testimony from the Kielburgers or the Perlmutters or the Prime Minister or Minister Rodriguez. It wasn't that questions weren't being answered. It was that the answers weren't what the other party wanted. So I remember very, very clearly, and look, I'll just very, very quickly give you some context. My riding, St. John Rosse. It's a great riding. Very proud of my city, I'm sure, as everybody that ever hears me speak. There was I think you can do it, I think it's on Parle, one of the Parliament site, Parle View or whatever. And, you know, you get that word chart or word graph about words you speak most often. And mine was St. John Rosse. And I don't apologize for that. I'm proud of that. Every time I speak, I talk about my riding. And, you know, I really wasn't a political person. Briefly served at student union at UNB. But, you know, I first became really politically aware, really cared in the riding when Elsie Wayne was the member of parliament for St. John Rosse. And Elsie Wayne was, you know, larger than life. You know, we couldn't have been obviously farther apart from an ideology standpoint, our beliefs, what we wanted to champion. But, you know, Elsie Wayne was very, very well known in this riding. And, you know, in a long standing member of this riding, or MP of this riding. I think she was 11 or 12 years. And then, you know, for one term, the riding switched back to Paul Zed, who was a Liberal MP. Then from Paul Zed, it swung back to the Conservatives, which was MP Rodney Weston. And then obviously me. And if you go back to the long history of this riding, I'm actually the first member of parliament to win the riding Liberal back to back. And, you know, I'm really, really proud of that. But the riding itself, Madam Chair, is, you know, a mix between, you know, obviously great business success, and we also have a lot of challenges with child poverty and social issues in this riding. But, you know, the meat and bones of this riding is, you know, union, middle class, hardworking Canadians, which is, you know, representative, very representative riding, I think, of many, many ridings across the country. And people in this riding are extremely concerned with respect to, obviously, the pandemic we're in, number one. The variants, number two. International travel, vaccines. You know, I walked by the television on my way in about an hour ago, and I saw a flash that India today, I may be a little off my numbers, and I apologize for this, had 315,000 cases of COVID diagnosed in one day. One day, 315,000 cases.
And that's just the ones they know of.
And that's, Chair, absolutely right. It scares the, you know what, out of me. And, you know, just, you know, I walked in, I got my coffee, I looked at that, I shook my head, scared, I come back out. Then we've got Premier Ford doing a press conference. You know, I guess a virtual or whatever you call it. He's obviously isolating right now. And, you know, talking about his challenges. You know, what's going on in Ontario. And again, it's horrifying to see what's happening in Ontario right now. And, you know, you go from that to seeing the numbers in Quebec and then Alberta. And then, you know, we obviously have concerns here too now in Atlantic Canada. Our numbers are low. Thank God our numbers are low. But you know, the variants are here, they're growing. And the reason I'm bringing all of this up is that we are in a once, I don't want to say once in a lifetime, but, a once in a generation crisis. That's where we are right now. All of us, everybody on PROC today, I know, is inundated with calls from constituents, from people that are scared, people that are concerned about what the future holds for them. And that is what we should be seized with as parliamentarians. We have work to do, important work as government. And there's important work to be done as opposition. And as all of us, every one of us needs to be pulling in the same direction. Of course, as government, we need to be challenged, and we need to come up and sometimes maybe readjust and think about sometimes some of our policies or what have you with unintended consequences and so on and so forth. But, Madam Chair, they're the kind of things that we can be doing together. And that they're the kind of things that this committee can be doing together. Making sure that even though we have disagreements, we will do the right things for Canadians. And for us to be, literally stuck, because let's just call a spade a spade. That's where we are right now. We're stuck. We're not moving forward. I mean, I've talked about, the movies I've seen, Inception or Friday the 13th, or, the one I would strike today would be Groundhog Day. Like, this is just the same thing again and again and again. And look, I won't pretend to be anywhere in the same ballpark as MP Sims and what he brings to the table with respect to his thoughts. But I do have a lot of thoughts. There's a lot I want to say. And, this is just a bit of a preamble before I get going, but I got a lot to say. And I can say it again, and I can say it again, and I'll say it again and again if I have to, because we need to find a way forward. And I think that MP Turnbull's amendment to MP Vecchio's motion is extremely valid. I mean, MP Vecchio's motion, and I won't read it. But, invitation to the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Minister of Diversity. Okay, well that's in the amendment. Renew invitations to Bill Morneau. Well, that's in the amendment to the motion. But the issue, I think, that kind of got all of us, if I can say and be so blunt, is just the wide scope of the initial motion. Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Youth, Morneau, Katie Telford, Kielburger, Mark Kielburger, Craig Kielburger, the Perlmutters, Farah and Martin, and obviously that was Speaker Spotlight, I believe. Documents, PMO, Privy Councils, production of records, communications, We Charity. Like, it cast a net so wide it's almost like let's put something out there, and with the greatest respect, because I have a ton of respect for MP Vecchio, a ton of respect. But it's almost kind of like, let's throw that motion out. There's no way they're going to accept that motion. Or motion, sorry. There's no way they're going to accept that. But let's get it out there so then we can make them say they won't accept it. And let's make them propose an amendment. And we did. We did propose an amendment. A good amendment, a fair amendment. And I quote, renew invitations issued to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Minister Chrystia Freeland, obviously, who I just am so proud of her leadership. I'm so proud of the ceilings she's shattering, the barriers she's breaking down. First female Minister of Finance, deliver a budget. I look at Minister Freeland and I'm inspired. I'm inspired by her leadership and it's not just her leadership, it's her style and her delivery and her authenticity. And that's what we need as a Minister of Finance, somebody with that vision, that leadership. And obviously she tabled and delivered a wonderful budget 2021, which was delivered a couple days back now. Just an unbelievable budget. I call it there's those points in, I think, our country's history where you can kind of drive that stake in the ground and say, this is a turning point. This is a turning point for, it's not our party. It's a turning point for the country. It's a shift. And for us to finally come forth with a solid commitment to childcare. I'm so very proud to be part of this government. And I know all of us will look back at a later date and say, I was there when we move forward with daycare. And look at the plan. Look how ambitious it is. I mean, we've got the leader, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if MP Blakely's still on the scan on the screen here. He might have needed to take a break. And I don't see him. But look, correct me if I'm wrong. Hopefully I get this right. But the leader of the NDP called the plan bold. He called the plan bold. Reduce daycare costs by 50% in 2022. Within the next several years, the goal is to provide $10 a day daycare. That could save, give or take, Madam Chair, but that could save the average family in my riding about $500 a month. Transformational. Absolutely transformational. Right, raise the OAS for over 74 years of age, 75 and up by 10%. Because they are the most vulnerable seniors. They have increased costs, and we ran on that. That was in our platform. That's not a surprise to anybody. We ran on that. So for us to fulfill with that, for us to replenish the trade corridor funding, for us to replenish the housing money, to come up with new green initiatives and a massive investment in green technology and infrastructure. One thing that flew under the radar, I believe, was the support for students and student loans. Continue a doubling of the student grant. But the other one that flew underneath the radar was the repayment of student loans, and the threshold from $25,000 now is up to $40,000. That's huge. It's unbelievably huge. And instead of 20% now of gross income, it's 10%. Huge. It can shave off your payment per month from about $400 to $90. It's incredibly important piece of legislation for students. Unbelievable. So look, I won't go on and on about everything in the budget because obviously that's not on topic. Thank you for not calling me out on that. But I thought it was important to talk about that. And then I'll dig back up a little bit with respect to Minister Chrystia Freeland, who delivered that budget that will change Canadians' lives. And then talk about that the amendment to the motion. The amendment to the motion renews invitations issued to Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, Minister Shager, to appear separately before the committee. So, even MP Turnbull is suggesting that, again, just very quickly, by replacing paragraph B with the following. B, renew the invitations issued to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Inclusion and Youth, each to appear separately before the committee for at least 90 minutes. And then just very quickly, by replacing paragraph C with the following, renew the invitations issued to the Honourable Bill Morneau, Craig Kielburger, Mark Kielburger, each to appear separately before the committee. Like, it's a good amendment. It's a good amendment. And I appeal to members to consider the amendment. I'm not so bold as to ask for a show of hands, but like accepting that amendment moves us forward. As I said earlier, the Prime Minister has testified. The Prime Minister has appeared before a committee. Just keeping it real, like MP Sims does, is, do we really expect, honestly, that we're going to hear anything different than what has already been said? Does anyone really, really believe that? I don't. He's already testified. He's already talked about it. So, I know there's times when I get accused of it all the time. Wayne, you get up there in Ottawa, you get in that Ottawa bubble, you think everybody cares about everything and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, you're right. Actually, some of my friends joked with me about that. You're in the Ottawa bubble. You don't really know what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, well, in this case, it's like we need to step back, Madam Chair. We need to, I won't do it, but we need to reread MP Turnbull's amendment. I get I get the art of, this isn't, call it what it is, but the art of negotiation. There needs to be win-win. There needs to be give and take. Both parties need to feel that they didn't get everything they wanted, but they got enough. And look, who am I? I'm a guy that loves his riding, that loves his country, that wants to represent his constituents. That's who I am. What you see is what you get. And I know the art of negotiation from my time with the St. John Sea Dogs. We did have to negotiate contracts with players, with billets, with our tenant. Well, we were the tenant, sorry, with our landlord, Harbor Station, with the city. And there's times when we were like, it's not really everything we want. We want a little more, but also there's times when I would step back with my organization and say, look, it's enough. It's enough, because then we can turn the page and move forward. And actually start to do things that matter, that mean something to Canadians. And I know that this is, I don't want to say mass, but, it's prorogation, that the We Charity thing's kind of in there, just gonna get that in. But I know what we need to do to move forward as a group. And I know we need to be united, facing, I think that one of the greatest challenges, I know, one of the greatest challenges this country has faced since World War II. Probably the greatest challenge. One of the greatest challenges this country has ever faced. And we need to face it together. And we need to show Canadians, Madam Chair, we need to show Canadians that we can work across the aisle, work in a, bipartisan way to represent Canadians. And I know, because I dealt with it this morning, how needy is not the right word, but how much in need Canadians are for our support. How much in need businesses and industries are for our support. And how appreciative Canadians are for the initiatives and programs we're moving forward. And look, out of the budget, I could pick the wage subsidy, that we're extending the wage subsidy through, or maybe off a day here, September 25th. And the rent support, we're extending it. And what a lifeline that is for businesses in our ridings to survive. The fact that we've extended the EI sickness, the fact that, we're offering the programs like the recovery benefit and the caregiver benefit. And like, the programs are needed. And I know Minister Freeland said it best, that we're going to be there as a government to get us through. I believe she said punch through, get us through COVID. The reason I hesitated with punch, I do a little bit of boxing, believe that or not, at my age. Actually had opportunities to spar with the Prime Minister a few times. I don't know if that's
No way.
a
And she
point
did
that
say punch.
But by the size here, you must get beat up a lot.
I do. I could show you a picture. I could actually show you a picture of me after my I'm 0-2 as a, believe this or not, I'm an actual, what do you call it, registered boxer in the Canadian boxing, blah, blah, blah. You have to, because I was intent when I actually boxed, this would be real quick, that I didn't really just want to do like a charity event. I actually wanted to do a competitive box. It's called Masters boxing for older people like me. And boy, oh boy, I'll show you the picture sometime after. I was beat up, like my nose was not crooked, but it was swollen up and my eye was kind of closed. And anyway, I lost. But it was a great experience. But back to the help you through punch. So we're going to punch through COVID. We're going to focus on support and recovery. And we're going to be ready to roll and help this economy recover. And we're going to come back stronger and more united than we've ever been. I'm absolutely convinced of that we will get up and we will move forward. And sure, we're going to invest in more, local production and make sure that, God forbid, but if this happens again, that we're going to be more ready and more prepared. And, I know there are those that, well, you should have done this and you could have done this. And oh my Lord, I know you can't see outside my window, but it's actually snowing right now. Like, what is going on out there? But look, we're going to do what we need to do to be, more prepared in the future, and more resilient as a country. And I think that that's one of my greatest frustrations. I'll be frank, is that I care about, obviously, I think I wear my heart on my sleeve with respect to that. I care so much about my riding and its people. Because I feel that my constituents, all constituents across the country, clearly deserve members of parliament who have their best interests in mind. That's key for me. Their best interests in mind, not my best interest. I want to make sure that they're represented and that I can advocate for them. And I can take their voices and come back to them with programs and meaningful programs like the Rapid Housing Initiative and the Federal Co-Investment Fund, where we can actually make investments in affordable housing in this riding and all of our ridings. One of the greatest frustrations for me, I'll be honest with you, with respect to housing was, and I didn't know, I guess I was a rookie MP, and I remember my first month, I was meeting with this group and I was going to do this with housing and do this with housing. And then all of a sudden, somebody got me aside and they're like, Wayne, you understand, right, that housing's a provincial jurisdiction. It's like, oh, and we can do housing bilats till we're blue in the face, but the province needs to pull that money through. I'm like, oh. But that's the beauty of the Rapid Housing Initiative and the Federal Co-Investment Fund. They're direct federal programs that we can deal with proponents, and the programs are stackable. They're wonderful, wonderful programs and initiatives. And so back to, MP Vecchio's motion, and then we got MP Turnbull, and I miss Ryan. I hope we see him back here soon. He's a great MP. Like I said before, and I'll say it again right now, we could all use more people like Ryan and, like Ryan's on other parties, and I certainly apologize. I know there's great MPs like that. And what I love about it, and I'll be honest, I caught myself at the very start of this session, was Ryan and I sit together on HUMA. And he's a wonderful, wonderful addition to our group in Human. And I've been fortunate. I mean, MP Vecchio and I were on Human together also. We did great work together. Great work together, especially on the, the poverty reduction strategy. We did temporary foreign worker. I mean, one thing about Human, it really crosses, Karen, I think it's three or four different, three or four. Yeah. Different departments. And makes up, and Karen, I think it's a third of the budget. Like it's massive, the responsibility of Human. And I love being on Human. Love it, because I feel it's one of those committees where you can really, I mean, I know all of us on our committees, of course, can make a difference, but especially here with the challenges we have in this riding with respect to poverty and child poverty and teenage pregnancy and so many other issues that just absolutely break my heart. Housing, that I can have a direct impact. So I remember Ryan and I were sitting together, and Ryan was, he was just kind of talking. Well, I'm going to propose this, and I'm going to do this, and I said to him, "Oh no, don't. Yeah, that's not going to work. Don't bother." And he's like, "Well, why?" And I'm like, "Well, that's just not how it." And I caught myself. I was like, "Whoa, I shouldn't like." I'm only 6 years. It's not like I've been around, like 60, like Scott. I caught myself, and then I stopped. And that's what's refreshing about an MP like Ryan, is that he's not afraid to propose something, try something, put something forward, because just because it hadn't worked before, or just because, well, that's not the way it should be, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't move forward and try. And that's why I'm so passionate about that. I don't know if everybody's as highlighted like mine, but this is Ryan's amendment to the motion, is that he brought the amendment forward because he felt, and he's doing it because he wants to find a way out here. We all do. Come on, let's call a spade a spade. And I looked at the amendment. I thought it was fair. And obviously, again, here we are. So, like, I'm just getting some of my notes here, sorry. I know this has been discussed before about, the prorogation and why it was done. And, oh, well, he did it to, when I say he, with the greatest respect, of course, the prime minister did it to avoid this. It's like, no. And I know MP Sims, said, the timing or this or that. Look, if any of us had the option of going back and tweaking something differently or redoing something differently or proposing something, sure, but it's all in hindsight. It's all looking back. And I think that, the motion and the resistance and the prorogation was to avoid, I would say that, the Conservative Party at times has a short memory because, obviously, and it's been talked about, but I think it's relevant to kind of compare what happened with the Harper government with prorogation. Much better saying that now. I've worked on it, prorogation, versus how prorogation worked with Prime Minister Trudeau. And you're dealt with one of the worst crises in the country's history. Well, the game changed. The floor changed beneath our feet. The rug was pulled out from all of us. And we needed to do a reboot, a reload, a refocus, a new throne speech, because we were dealt with something that no other government has had to deal with. A health crisis of worldwide proportions. You know, I laugh when I go back now and I think about, you know, us. I made a statement once in the House about, you know, then Prime Minister Harper, and there was the deficits that he ran. And I remember getting back, whoa, but that doesn't, no, that doesn't count, because we were in a crisis. I remember that's what I got back. We were in a major financial crisis. We had to, you know, invest, and we had to do this and that. But yet now, what we're in is, you know, 1,000 times more serious and worse and financially damaging than that. And now it's like, you shouldn't have prorogued. You didn't need to reset. You know, you've invested too much in these programs. You need to cut programs back. And I say no. We need to have respectful disagreements. I think we've shown as government that we will listen to opposition. We will take suggestions and work with, whether it's the Conservative Party, NDP Party, the Bloc, Green Party, and we will come up with programs and policies that will support and be there for Canadians. And sure, we're going to make mistakes. And yes, we had to change course and pivot very, very quickly. But, you know, like I said, and I've said it before, it's like, you know, we're trying to, you know, put gas in the airplane while it's taking off. Like, we don't have a playbook to go by here. We are doing whatever it takes to protect Canadians and to make sure we get through this. So, did we need to prorogue? Yes, we needed a new throne speech. We needed to reset and reboot. No question. The fact that the committee wants to study and analyze the reasons for, just mumble here, but prorogation. I get it. I understand. I know MP Sims echoed the same thing. I get it. I understand that. But then it's like, you know, this, like I said before, and then the amendment. It's like, let's move forward. Let's call some witnesses. Let's get it out there. I know MP Blakely certainly said, well, you know, there's questions that I want to ask the Prime Minister. Okay. Well, I mean, this may be wrong to say, but there's the House of Commons, there's question period, there's all kinds of ways publicly to ask questions of the Prime Minister. All kinds of ways. So again, it just takes me back to, well, what's this really about? What really is the end game here for this, especially, and look, I wouldn't even be talking with as much passion as I can muster if not for the amendment. You know, look, I would have been the first to say to my own party, look, we need to not just say no. We need to offer something that is good and has credible people invited and is fair and will make us go forward. Now, I don't think, hopefully I'm not talking too loud. Chair, can I just check? Is it okay if I check? Is it fair to check with the interpreters? Is my voice, is that coming through okay? Am I talking too loud or is that okay?
I mean, it's not, the mic is not popping. I would think loud
Okay.
would probably be beneficial, but I can check with the clerk if everything's okay.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I've gotten a thumbs up from the interpreters, Mr. Long, so your sound is fine. They can hear you fine.
Okay.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So,
thank you.
I mean, I think this. I'll be honest with myself, and obviously my constituency office here, you know, my 800 square feet I've got here in Market Square, beautiful little office. My constituents aren't seized with this. If I made the first 50 people who walked by my office in that mall and gave them a piece of paper and said, look, will you list out for me the top 20 priorities, the top 20 concerns that you have? I will guarantee you, maybe not guarantee you, but with 99% assurance that prorogation wouldn't be on the sheet. Like, no way. Come on. No way. I know, and I respect, obviously, members so much, but like, come on. This isn't what constituents are seized with. So again, if we're truly here to represent our constituents, why are we so seized with it if our constituents aren't? Now, look, I can't speak for every riding across the country, obviously. I can't speak for every riding. Maybe there's some ridings where constituency offices are absolutely inundated with calls and emails and Facebooks about PROC and about a study in prorogation. Look, not unless I'm missing something. I don't see it. So, like, before I really start to dig in here to, I guess, you know, you want to call it my speech, I think out loud about what is there a better way? Is there a way we can move forward? It's not like we're trying to make this go away. We're not making it go away. It's right here. Let's study it. It's not like we're trying to like sweep it underneath here. Let's get it in the bottom of the pile. No. MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion, this says, look, let's get going. Let's call on these people. Geez, last time I checked, Minister Freeland was, you know, pretty popular, pretty big name out there. But we're stuck. And that's what frustrates me, I guess, from a 5.5-year MP. I know that, my constituents want me to be focused on other things. And as other speakers have said before me, look, I would take the criticism if they were like, you guys are trying to totally avoid this and you guys are, like, the Prime Minister has testified. Minister Rodriguez has testified. MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion calls for basically the study to move forward. This isn't hiding or burying anything. It's just coming up with a way that the opposition members, which is absolutely, let me be clear, absolutely they're right. It makes us better. Trust me. I'm not afraid at times to speak my mind too. I believe it makes us a better government when we can feel a little uncomfortable. We can be pushed. We can be challenged. That's what good government is about. And MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion is a path forward. I'm convinced of that. Now, obviously, a lot of people on this committee aren't convinced of that. I remember when Prime Minister Harper PROC, and I believe, I don't know, I think probably Scott's I believe it was 2008 when MP Harper Prime Minister Harper PROC. I remember at that point, obviously, I was with the Sea Dogs. And I remember, as I told you earlier again, I really wasn't a political animal. I still don't really consider myself, to be perfectly blunt, a political animal. But I remember doing the double take. And I remember Canadians being outraged. I remember I was traveling with the team. I forget where I was. 2008, actually. We were pretty good in 2008. Now, we won the Memorial Cup, obviously, in 2011, as you are all sick of hearing me say. Quickest team to ever win a Memorial Cup from an expansion, just saying. I mean, St. John Sea Dogs were a piece of paper in 2004, and then we won a Memorial Cup in 2011. That's pretty good stuff. We had the best, actually, back-to-back record in CHL history. Next to the Windsor Spitfires.
Sure.
And the London Knights. The London Knights are a very good team.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Long. Yes, Ms. Vecchio.
Yes, point of order. I'm hoping my mic, everything's on fine.
Yeah.
I think I know the member knows that I love watching hockey and I love the OHL because I'm from Ontario, but we're not in that committee on hockey today. We're in PROC. So if we could just pull it back to PROC, that'd be great.
No, that's fair, Ms. Vecchio.
Yeah.
Thanks for the reminder.
No, I appreciate that. And I know MP Vecchio is a London Knights fan. London Knights are a great organization, obviously the Hunter brothers. And their record of winning Memorial Cups and championships, Karen, are really second to none. Windsor Spitfires had a great year, or a great run. But then, you know what? There's the St. John Sea Dogs. We broke records. I mean, there was one year our record was actually 77-11. Think about that. We've got players in the NHL. And look, the reason I bring
Madam Chair, point of order.
Yeah, I don't think
Thanks.
you're getting back to the topic at hand, Mr. Long.
That's fair.
Yeah.
The reason I bring it up very quickly, the reason I brought that up was I was on the road with the dogs. See, I'm going to climb back up now. I was on the road with the dogs when Prime Minister Harper prorogued. Okay. And I remember sitting down with some people in our organization, kind of like, what is this? What's this prorogue thing? What's it mean? I didn't know what it meant. Yeah, you know, I'd been to Parliament Hill like 2 times in my life and really don't remember them. I was very, very young at that point. So I mean, look, call a spade a spade. Prorogations are widely used. And as the government already said when we report it, prorogation was for the purpose of responding to the ongoing COVID pandemic. And as a government, we needed to plan. We needed to focus. And really get ready for what I would call, the second wave. We didn't know what we were facing, Madam Chair. When we needed to prorogue, we didn't know none of us did. Come on. None of us knew. Think back now a year and 4 months ago to January, February. Like, we didn't know what was going to hit us. We saw news reports about Wuhan, and what was going on in China, and we didn't know. So, what we were faced with was unprecedented. And when we were all sent home, we didn't know what we were going to have to face. Fears, the challenges, the death, the devastation, and not just economic devastation, my Lord, the personal devastation. We didn't know. So, when we prorogued, and I think it's extremely important to point out the differences, because again, MP Vecchio's motion and I'm not going to read it, promise. But that in respect to the committee's study of the government's reasons for proroguing. So the motion is about studying the government's reasons for proroguing. I mean, that's what it says. So let's all of us step back and think about that. We need to study the government's reasons for prorogation. Like the reasons for prorogation, we were facing the crisis of our lifetimes. We needed to prepare for the second wave, plan, pivot. But yet, not just study the reasons for prorogation. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Let's invite the Kilburgers and the Perlmutters, and let's seize documents, and let's get this, and let's call the Prime Minister, and let's whether you agree or not, the reasons for prorogation were because we were faced with a crisis. And I find it extremely interesting that, of course, the We Charity makes its way in here. So that's when even a guy like me who, I'm not the most self-admittedly most partisan person in the world. As soon as I read it, and at that point, really, I wasn't even involved with PROC. I was doing my thing on human, and life was good. But then I read the motion, and I was like, come on, like this isn't like the first sentence again. Study the reasons for prorogation, but then it's about this and that and we, and then I said, well, hold on here. The Prime Minister already testified. He already testified. So why do you want him again? And we all know why. It's to get a clip or to get something in the news that night or to try a gotcha question. Like, the reasons we prorogued were because we needed to pivot. And pivot we have. And standing up for Canadians, we have. And like the fact that we were asked in this motion to accept a study on the reasons for prorogation, like I think it's important to put into context how Prime Minister Harper prorogued and the reasons versus for what we did and how we prorogued. So I just think for context and for, the people that are watching today, understanding what we're debating, and obviously we're debating the amendment, just so I know people kind of get dug deep in this, but right now we are talking about MP Turnbull's amendment to MP Vecchio's motion. So let's compare. I want to call that out. Let's compare that. We've got Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and he prorogued. So there was an article. I'm not sure it's been quoted, but I know there was a New York Times article. And, I won't read you the whole article. I have them all here on my screen. I could read you enough articles, Madam Chair, on prorogation, the pros and cons, and who did what and where. I mean, look, you wouldn't need a watch. You need a calendar to keep track of time for me, because I've got so much that I want to say about this. And so many points I want to bring forward with respect to the motion and the sub-amendment and the amendment to the motion, so on and so forth. But, I mean, here's the article. Canada's parliamentary opposition reacted with outrage on Thursday after Prime Minister Stephen Harper shut down the legislature until January 26, seeking to forestall the no-confidence vote that he was sure to lose. And he was going to lose that, and possibly provoking a constitutional crisis. This is a New York, for context, Madam Chair, this is a New York Times article. The opposition fiercely criticized the decision to suspend Parliament, accusing Mr. Harper of undermining the nation's democracy. We have to say to Canadians, is this the kind of government you want, said Bob Rae, member of the opposition party. You want a party in place that is so undemocratic it will not meet. That sentiment was echoed by constitutional scholars who lamented that the Governor General might have created a mechanism that future prime ministers could use to bypass the legislature. Another one, CBC. CBC. Canadians outraged by Harper's use of prorogation. Thousands of people attended rallies in towns and cities across Canada on Saturday to speak out against Prime Minister Stephen Harper's decision. Thousands of protesters. And so on and so forth, these articles. And then let's compare. Let's compare to what the articles in what happened with us when we prorogued. Hill Times. Hill Times wrote, Trudeau government says prorogation, but time to build a robust response to the pandemic. We knew our plan would need to get us not just through the weeks and months ahead, but even further down the road. This gave us time we needed to do exactly that, to build a robust, responsive, comprehensive approach to the challenges. The prorogation that happened with us versus the prorogation that happened in the Harper era, they're like apples and oranges. They're not even the same thing. We were faced with the challenge of a lifetime. We needed to pause, to reflect, to rebuild, to reboot, to move forward in the name of all Canadians. And again, I understand fully why the Conservative Party moved forward with the amendment. On the motion about prorogation. I get it. Want to study it. Study it. Like this, they wrote a textbook here in this motion. Like it's like, let's invite everybody but the kitchen sink to testify. And let's ramp this up. And let's make it a big public affair. And I've been in the back rooms of strategy, whether it's hockey or salmon business or what have you. I absolutely, totally get it when you've got the court of public opinion behind you. It's politics. I get it. They're like, you know what? We got momentum. We got people. Our phones are ringing off the hook. Let's go. Let's get this going. It's going to be good for us. Well, newsflash. Wayne Long newsflash. Nobody cares. They want us to work together. They want us to find a way forward. MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion takes us forward. And I took a call. I did an AMA last night. And I do these AMAs. They're called Ask Me Anything. I do them pretty much every 2 weeks. Great views. You know, I get anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 people that view in and watch them. Give or take 200-300 questions in an hour. It's crazy. So, you know, I always throw it out there. Hey, it's Wayne. What's up? You know, a little ramble about what's going on in the riding. So I just say, like, look, you know, live. I do them live. Ask me anything, AMA. Ask me anything. Talk about what you want, your concerns, I've done since, you know, I've been kind of subbing in here. I don't know, whatever, 2-3 of them. I would say easily between the 3,000 questions. Okay. Do you know how many questions I've had on prorogation? Do you know how many comments I've had about prorogation and PROC and amendments, sub-amendments? Do you know how many I've had out of 1,000? It's less than one. Okay? It's less than one. And that's why I absolutely know that the right thing for us to do is to find a way forward. And MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion, held it up too many times, is a way forward. Oops. Madam Chair, do you mind if I just take a drink of water? Is that okay?
No, go ahead.
Thank you.
I wanted to also ask if it was okay to suspend for 15 minutes for a quick health break.
That I would appreciate that, Madam Chair.
Okay. So it seems like everyone's nodding in the affirmative. Okay. So we'll see you all back at 1:35.
Thank you. I got some more
Okay.
to go here.
Or 1:36. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
And I guess we'll start from where we left off. Mr. Long, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Chair. And thank you for the 15-minute break. It was much appreciated. I get reloaded here. I've got a little bowl of bits and bites and a fresh glass of water.
Sorry about that, Justin and everyone.
Okay, no problem, Tom. You're there, so we can hear you.
Okay.
Good to go.
Hey, Tom.
Okay.
Hey, Scotty.
I'm reloaded. I'm refreshed. I've got a blizzard going on outside my window right now. It was a snowstorm here about 30 minutes ago, but literally a blizzard. I don't know what's going on here.
Not nice.
So look, I want to try to bring us back to where I was with respect to my thoughts. And I think that, unlike MP Sims, who comes at it from a more, historic, experience in Parliament vantage point, I'm coming at it from more of a, more recently elected background. So, same, I think, frustration, but just a little bit different at times with obviously the massive experience that MP Scott Sims has. I mean, I couldn't carry his school books with respect to how he speaks, with such candor and passion, and he knows his stuff, and that's why, when he spoke, and like I said earlier, a little ADHD flowing through my blood here. Sometimes it's hard for me to pay attention. But anyway, Scott's speech was really, really good. So, I'm trying to articulate a bit of a different vantage point with respect to MP Vecchio's motion and MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion, and trying to find a way forward here. And I just think that, I've talked about comparing the different prorogations and, between Prime Minister Harper and obviously what happened here with our government and Prime Minister Trudeau. And they couldn't be more different. And that's, I think, where I'm coming from. I'm coming from it really from two vantage points. I'm coming at it from they're like night and day. They're like night and day what happened with Prime Minister Harper and what we did. Because we did have to pivot. And we were faced with, one of the greatest, and are faced with, not were, are faced with one of the greatest health challenges of our time. And what we had to do was necessary. So, I know we've talked about that, and I know I've talked about that, obviously, whatever, for an hour and 30 minutes now. But so I'm kind of done with the comparing of the two. We all know that story. And we also all know, if we're being honest with ourselves, what priority this has with our constituents. Like I said earlier, if I took a piece of paper outside and asked my constituents to list the top 20, top 30, top 50 things, prorogation, and this study wouldn't make it, because Canadians are concerned with, they're seized with what's happening on a daily basis in their lives. And we cannot turn on the television and not see another tragedy another life that's been taken, another life that's been ruined. We see it every day. And it's not over. And we need to be vigilant. We need to, all of us on all parties, we need to stand together and do the right things for Canadians. Because with variants now coming, and we don't really know what the future holds, we need to be together. And that's why I think MP Turnbull's amendment to the motion is so critically important for us to consider. And I would love to see a show of hands. You know, we could vote on this now, and move forward, and do the business that Canadians want us to do.
A point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes. Calling for the vote.
In response to Mr. Long's request, yeah, I'm ready to vote on this. So let's go ahead and vote. I appreciate the suggestion.
Okay. Back to Mr. Long.
Not yet. I have a few more thoughts that I want to say about this. The fact that, and I think MP Nader would agree with me, that his office isn't inundated with calls about this, or his phone's not ringing off the hook about this. Not at all. Not at all. We owe it to our constituents to move forward, and we owe it to Canadians to come up with a way forward. And I know for a lot of us that had, you know, basically all of us that had, you know, previous careers before this career, if you want to call it that. I mean, except for MP Sims, he's been an MP for what, 50 years now. So he might have started as an MP when he was very, very, very young. But that's where somebody like me gets frustrated, because I know that, you know, if this was, you know, the business world, or, you know, we were around the boardroom table, or as the, you know, as the president of the St. John Sea Dogs, I had to make decisions. You would do what's best. I would make decisions and implement them what was best for our season ticket holders, my community, fans of the Sea Dogs. And I mean, I will say
Ken?
one of the greatest things about sports.
Sorry, Ken, you're not on mute, Ken. Are you also frozen, Ken? Okay.
Oh, he's on mute now.
Yeah.
He's frozen, but he's on mute. Oh no, actually, he wasn't frozen. Look, he's just engulfed there. But that was one of, you know, if I can, Chair, that was one of the great things that I always loved about sports, is that, you know, when we came down King Street with the Memorial Cup, 20, 30,000 people all around. Didn't matter if you're conservative or NDP or liberal or green or whatever. We were united, and we had a common thing to rally around. And obviously that was a very good thing. But as MPs, we also have a common thing now to rally around and to stand together shoulder to shoulder. And that's our fight against this deadly pandemic. That's what Canadians want. they don't want us talking about prorogation and, let's invite this and that. And, again, I get frustrated because the Prime Minister's already been invited and has already testified. And I don't think anyone in this committee would believe that there'd actually be some new revelation out of another testimony. Come on, I don't think anybody really believes that. And that's why I feel we need to find a way forward here. We need to come together for the benefit of all Canadians. And I know our government is seized with trying to make sure that we get through this together. We invest and refocus and get ready for a resurgence. And we put Canadians first. We put people first. And that's why, I advocate every day in this riding for my constituents. And I know I've talked about that before. I want to make sure that we get our share of, federal funding, and make sure I work with proponents to make sure we get the right things in here for this beautiful port city, this industrial riding. A lot of people don't know it, but right outside my window, the snowstorm stopped. But if I look right across the harbor, I'm looking at the third busiest port in Canada per volume. Think about that. For volume, not container, but volume, third busiest port in Canada. And I want to work with that port. I want to work with proponents. I want to make sure that our government delivers strategic infrastructure. Our government delivers programs. And that's why it was so important for us to prorogue. That's why it was so important for us to have another throne speech, to reload, to refocus, to say, look, we need to, invest in this across the country. We need to work with these industries across the country.
What's the, I know this is really bad of me, but I can't help. I was trying to stop myself for the last minute. What's the difference between per container or per volume? Like, don't containers make volume?
They do, but you see, one of the things that we import here is a lot of oil for the refinery.
Oh.
So sheer actual tonnage, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay, continue. I don't want you to go
Yeah,
off.
no problem. I thought you were going to call Chair point of order and tell me to get back on the subject. I was starting to get more paranoid when you jumped in there.
I'm being bad myself. I got you off, but you had brought us there, and
I
couldn't help but ask the question. So if you could definitely stay on topic, though.
Yeah, but I guess my point is that the prorogation allowed us to step back and kind of refocus what we needed to do to make sure that we helped Canadians through this. Again, whether it was the CERB or CEBA or rent support or, infrastructure, we created the Resiliency Infrastructure Fund, which was, instead of the typical, give or take 40-40-20, it was more of an 80-20, a lot more flexibility. Like, there are the kind of things that we did. We supported communities. There was the money that went to help the municipalities. There was I know we have a new name, but the gas tax doubling for communities. There were programs that we did that we knew we needed to be there for Canadians. And that's why we did it. We didn't do it to run and hide. How do you accuse someone of running and hiding when the Prime Minister testifies? When I think we were very open and transparent about it, where committees continue to do work. I don't see that. I don't see that at all. And I believe fully that MP Turnbull, and maybe he's listening in, I'm not sure. I hope to see him back sooner than later. But that's what his amendment to the motion is for. It's to find a way forward. It's an opportunity for us to work together and do what Canadians not want us to do, but need us to do. That's why we were elected. I'm proud. I'm extremely proud and privileged to be, number one, the member of parliament for my wonderful riding, but also to be able to lead a community that is in crisis. And, you know, I won't look back, obviously, in future years fondly of this time, but I will look back and say, like, leadership is easy in easy times. It's easy to be a leader when everything's great. But leadership really shows in tough times, in difficult times. That's when leadership shows. And that's the kind of leadership that each and every one of our ridings, despite the political party, that doesn't matter. We're in our constituencies to show leadership to our constituents, to be there for them, to offer support, to offer the programs. They're the kind of things that I'm going to look back with a ton of pride on, saying that the programs we offered, we were there when people needed us. And I believe that NP Turnbull's amendment to MP Vecchio's motion is a way forward for us. And look, Madam Chair, I do have a bit more I would like to talk about. I recognize that we do have 3 more hands up there, and I'm sure everybody has their thoughts. And I certainly want to say that I do have a few other things I would like to talk about just to provoke some more thought amongst the members and certainly amongst Canadians. But in fairness to other colleagues that certainly have things that they want to say, I think I will wrap up. I would like the opportunity, hopefully, to come back and continue with some of my thoughts. But Madam Chair, I'll yield the floor to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Long. Ms. Shanahan.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, I'd like to take this opportunity to speak French, maybe to give the interpreters a chance to change language. It is genuinely a pleasure for me to be here today. This is the first time that I'm replacing someone on this committee. I am more or less aware of the committee's mandate, if I understand it correctly. It deals with management of the House. There are also aspects involving Elections Canada, our standing orders, recommendations we may make as parliamentarians for the good order and smooth running of elections. It's quite certain that, like my most excellent colleagues, Mr. Sims and Mr. Long, have just said, any report that is produced by this committee deals with the confidence that must exist between the government and the people of Canada. I am someone who loves history. It was very interesting to hear the speech that Mr. Sims made, particularly when we go back to the origins of our parliamentary system, rooted in the Magna Carta. I can see in listening to him that he knows what he's talking about. And this is something that struck me when I was elected in 2015 as the member for Châteauguay-Lacolle, that members on both sides of the House who were already there had a very good understanding of the principles of a responsible government and how important it is to keep that relationship, the relationship with the people of Canada that involves accountability. We have to show Canadians that we do what it takes to earn and keep their trust. Because in the end, what is government? What is politics? It is the collection of activities and actions that we recommend, that we put in place, that we review, debate, discuss, provide reasoning for. That is what constitutes the governance of a country. I did want to add something, however, and certainly in spite of the fact, Madam Chair, that I deeply appreciate the fact that we do work quite informally at times on this committee and that interactions between members are extremely pleasant. If I may say, around the table, even though we're all on screens, it's a good atmosphere. Quebec's contribution in the formation of a responsible government is important. It is as important, I believe, because, or it is as important as it is because that is how we distinguish ourselves from Commonwealth countries. It is based on recognition of fundamental rights and recognition of a distinct community, a community that is distinct from another community, even when that other community constitutes the majority. In a democracy, it is the majority that carries the day, but nonetheless, that must be done with respect for all citizens of a given country. What I often say here in my riding, and Châteauguay-Lacolle is a place where life is good. I often say that. We're in a region that represents people, families, a lot of seniors who've been here a long time, generations of farmers, dairy producers. We have a manufacturing sector. We have people who are deeply involved in the community. But these aren't necessarily people who follow politics day to day. So when I was elected, I said, well, in an election campaign, that's fine. We introduce ourselves. People know that we represent one party or another party. We explain our positions, our values, our policies. We are proponents of a given point of view. We set forth the measures that we want applied. But once the campaign is done, our job is to represent all constituents in our riding. And I think that is a hallmark of responsible government. It is a government which is responsible for all citizens. I am profoundly interested not only in the history of our parliament, but also in the ways in which conventions and traditions came about. Because that much of it is, or dates back, I should say, to well before Confederation in 1862. So there is an excellent partnership between two members of parliament on or around 1840, or Robert Baldwin of Toronto and Louis-Hippolyte Lafontaine of Quebec. If anyone is interested, there is a book by John Ralston Saul. It's beautifully written, and it shows how those two men who came from such disparate cultures to very different religions, because, you know, at the time, being a Protestant and being a Catholic were two profoundly different things. Religious differences were also frequently much more important than religious differences were profoundly significant, more so than linguistic ones, is what I'm trying to say, because most people were bilingual. Religion was culture, it was identity at that time. So all that to say that these two men worked together and at one point, Louis-Hippolyte Lafontaine lost his seat, and Robert Baldwin found a riding in Toronto. I really don't think we could do that today.
Yes, Ms. Vecchio.
I'm enjoying it, but we've given at least the first 7 minutes, and I'm just hoping we can get on to the actual motion.
Okay. Just a reminder to Ms. Shanahan to stay on topic.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Puis, c'est vrai que...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a lot of people here are quite passionate about history. These traditions, these practices, which were ways of solving problems day to day, well, it is these practices that gave rise to the traditions and conventions we have today. But if I'm to come back to what we're doing here at PROC, another brief anecdote. I appeared with a number of members. I spoke during the last Parliament on the bill to change the name of my riding, and that was not just a whim, Madam Chair. There was a genuine error in the name my riding had been given. This was an issue very important to the people of the riding. Châteauguay is Châteauguay, but La Colle is a different municipality. And it's not even in my riding. The municipality in my riding is Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle. There is a big difference between La Colle and Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle. Now, why do I bring this up? Because at the time, there was a commission in charge of delineating ridings and receiving suggestions for new riding names and setting out new boundaries. The then member for Châteauguay and the neighboring riding did not do their jobs. They didn't check. So only when it was too late, only when we were at the 2015 elections did we see the mistake, and by then it was too late. This led to misunderstandings for people, because the people in our community have a lot more to do. They're very busy and they don't always have time to pay strict attention to riding boundaries. People from La Colle thought they were in my riding, but in fact, they weren't. They were part of the riding of Saint-Jean. I think that's what it's called, but I may be wrong. People in Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle did not find that pleasant, so I introduced a bill to have that changed. And I was criticized by a number of members of the Bloc Québécois and the NDP at the time. They said it wasn't important. But I don't get to decide what's important to my constituents. I listen to my constituents, and that was important to them. I was very pleased. I see that Ms. Normandin has raised her hand, and I'm certainly happy to yield some of my time if she can correct me on the riding of Saint-Jean. Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Point of order. La Colle is in my riding, but my point of order is rather on the relevance of these statements. I think it would be very interesting to chat about when we're back on the road and go back to our ridings. But right now, I'd like to hear you on Mr. Turnbull's amendment. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Relevant to PROC, but in terms of the topic that we are on right now, redistribution, renaming, all of that stuff does come to this committee. But if we can refocus the comments towards prorogation and the current amendment that we're on.
Excellent. Excellent. Merci. Puis...
Yes, excellent. I'm happy to hear that this is a subject for the committee, because I will take note of that for next time. Even though my bill did not go any further, well, it died on the order paper. You know, when there's prorogation, bills die on the order paper at prorogation. It can be the choice a government makes to choose prorogation and to go ahead with it. But if we come back to the principle of responsible government, as my colleagues Mr. Sim and Mr. Long have said, when a government deals with a situation where everything changes, well, we were in a crisis, a world crisis. Everything we've done, our whole election platform, when we came back into government in 2019, not one of us was averse to taking action. We wanted to implement our election platform. We wanted to go ahead with all the provinces, all the promises that we'd made. But we were in a crisis, and the crisis was of such a scale. Well, all my colleagues around the table will remember. Think back to March. In March, we were in lockdown, complete lockdown. We couldn't even meet. We had no idea how contagious this virus was. We had no idea how far this would go and how hard it would hit. It became clear in the days, weeks and months that followed what a huge problem, and problem is not even a good word, it would cause, what a crisis it would cause. We were exchanging messages, Skyping, setting up remote communication. So many constituents were looking for help because there wasn't just a health crisis, there was a financial crisis. Because, as soon as you tell someone to stay home when they have symptoms, we didn't have a test at that point. We were telling people to stay home when they had any kind of symptoms. If you have the sniffles, well, you might have COVID, stay home. But how do you stay home when you don't have paid sick leave? We were getting all kinds of calls on this, and I know that everybody was getting the same calls. All political parties were getting calls daily, and themselves calling experts, calling senior officials, calling our health teams to get information so that we could talk about what we were seeing on the ground. As my colleagues have said, we were in a state of war. We were at war against an invisible enemy. I am so proud. And to give you something of my background, I've worked in banking, financial planning. So I've been in finance, I've been a social worker. I was deeply aware of the fact that people were making fundamentally important decisions that weren't only crucial to their health, but also to their frequently precarious financial situation. And, it's so stressing to look for information on websites at the best of times. And it is worse. It was worse then. There was a single father, for example, who had a job in a restaurant. He couldn't go to work, but he had his child at home. He was looking for another job. He was dealing with EI, and the EI system hadn't been built for this kind of emergency. The EI system, and with all due respect to everyone who works in this and who knows the history of it, EI is a last resort. It's not the first thing you turn to generally. And EI requires proving eligibility. You have to provide documents. You have to answer questions before you get EI benefits. So I'm so proud of the fact that we were able to pull together, all of us, behind an idea that was absolutely wonderful. 6 weeks earlier, nobody would have thought that it would be possible to come up with the kind of assistance that we provided. I have a great deal of respect for the computer system that manages payments and benefits, and we wanted to make sure that the computer system, that the payment system would be able to provide payments.
Yes,
Just relevance on this. I recognize, but we are going so far outside of the scope of this motion. Thank you.
No, I this time I didn't find it to be so much, but anyways, Ms. Shanahan, if you can, I thought you were relating it to the reason for proroguing, and but I guess Ms. Vecchio doesn't see the direct link, so maybe you can reemphasize how you find the link.
Excellent point. Puis,
very good point. At one point, I was in finance, where I used to work with people. So if we bring it back to the government's actions, then it was quite clear that we did what we could. We were doing what we could. It's impossible to change government systems and massive computer programs overnight. Income security programs, other programs. And we haven't even touched on companies yet, businesses yet. The first calls came from individuals. Businesses were something else again. We needed a complete rethink of the whole machinery of government. We couldn't even have parliamentarians meeting safely at that point. So, the fact that we did what we could with temporary measures, we held meetings the way we could. We had question periods. I know that ministers' offices were extremely open to receiving all kinds of calls. I have colleagues in opposition parties who said that they were able to access members' offices and the members and ministers' offices to help with problems people were having. Problems needed to be identified. Key factors needed to be identified. I couldn't tell you what the medical aspects of it are. That's really not my field. But we didn't even have a decent understanding of the virus and how it spread and how it made people sick. But to be a responsible government, we had to stop. We needed a circuit breaker. We needed a reset. And government is a political tool. Politics isn't necessarily something unpleasant or nasty. Politics is the collective term for activities and visions, the policies and programs that a government, a group, a party that acts as the government puts forward to govern the country. So what it took was a need, well, there was a need, I should say, for the Prime Minister to prorogue. And as my colleagues say, we can ask why now? Well, perhaps those questions should have been put earlier. But here's the answer. We were in the middle of a crisis. I have my own way of doing things. And what I wanted to do, particularly for people who needed help, I wanted to be able to say what the plan was, the plan that we could formulate once we had more information about COVID, not perhaps control of it. We know that we've been living with it day to day and being surprised every day, but we needed a plan to do our best to control what we could control. That's why we needed a new plan, a plan of how to manage the pandemic, manage the financial crisis that it caused, and once we could, and we hope that will be soon, come back with a good economic recovery. That's why, to my mind, prorogation was absolutely the right thing to do, and proroguing was the right decision by the government.
Interrupt my friend and colleague.
Yes, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor?
I'm just wondering if we would maybe able to ask the committee members if we're planning on continuing on, or if we have any idea if we're planning on suspending. Just wanting to plan the activities for the day is my only question. So I don't know if we could perhaps ask the committee what their thoughts are on that.
Sure, I can definitely ask. I guess you've asked. I could directly ask, but you have indirectly asked. Would the committee wish to adjourn or suspend for the day to move on to, what is it now? We have, we're in the middle of QP, but I guess there's other committees that will be carrying on this afternoon. So I know I have another committee, which is a very important one today, but I don't know. How does the committee feel about that?
Madam Speaker, I know that from we're happy to suspend as long as we get back to this issue at our next scheduled time. I think this is the most, but we do recognize that if we do not end by 2:30, that there will be an impact on other committees. So I'm okay with, I will speak on, I'm looking at Nader, I know he can speak too, but on behalf of my group, I know that, or my party, I know that we're okay with suspending and coming back.
Okay, Daniel has the thumbs up, and Madame Normandin, are you okay with that? All right, then.
Madame Normandin, do you agree?
The interpretation just came in. We'll suspend for today then and resume at our next scheduled time. Thank you, everyone.